Thank you, Jason. Okay, thank you. Okay. So I have been here for a while, and I'm an old guy, and here I am going to come and talk to some young people and try and impart some wisdom to you. I know there's people of various ages here. Primarily I'm going to talk to younger people, the college students. I want to read you something before I start. I have many times asked myself, not without wonder, the source of a certain error which, since it is committed by all the old without exception, can be believed to be proper and natural to man. Namely, that they nearly all praise the past and blame the present, revile our actions and behavior and everything which they themselves did not do when they were young, and affirm too that every good custom and way of life, every virtue, and in short all things imaginable, are always going from bad to worse. And truly it seems against all reason and a cause for astonishment that maturity of age, which with its long experience in all other respects usually perfects a man's judgment, in this matter corrupts it so much that he does not realize that if the world were always growing worse, and if fathers were generally better than their sons, we would long since have become so rotten that no further deterioration would be possible. This is written in 1526. So it seems that this has been going on a long time. That the older people come and say to the younger people, listen, there's some stuff that you've been doing that maybe you ought to think about, because in the old days we weren't that way. Everything was okay, but I said the same thing to people older than I was. So I'm going to try today, if I can, to impart to you some wisdom, if I have it, about living an okay life. A good enough life. I'm not going to the great one. I'm going to the good one. I'm going to the moral one, to the nice one, to the ethical one. That's what I want to talk about. I've learned a lot of things in the years that I've been studying psychology and working with students. Many of them are useless things. There are some things, however, that I think are worthwhile, and that's what I want to tell you about. You're not going to like all of them. Not going to agree with all of them, but I'll tell you what I think may be useful for you to keep in mind. So I have a slideshow. I struggled with this. Usually all I need is like a flower and a chair. It's usually enough. We have something, it's sort of like a sit down, but let me put this on. Hold on. Okay, well, unmute the picture. So Jason came up with this wonderful title. Live strong, live well, do good. And you can get a wristband for each one of these, as you can see. So, I mean, it's great. But just if you put on a yellow wristband, it doesn't make you strong. Blue wristband doesn't make you well. And just, I probably know some people who do pretty crummy things with the orange band on. So there's something more. There's got to be something more than just saying this. So what we're going to do is see if I can get this to work. My grandmother, an old Jewish lady from Hungary, used to have something called a kumsitz. It means, let's come together and sit down. Let's talk. Let's talk about some stuff that maybe we wouldn't talk about outside the family, or maybe we wouldn't talk about ordinarily. But it's a time when we have to think seriously about something for a short period of time. And it used to be you'd have some pastry or something. Now we have carrots. Okay. Strength, wellness, and goodness. Okay? And those are the themes that I'm going to try and pull through my talk with you today. And I'm going to say some stuff that's serious and also some things that maybe are a little bit more fanciful. But let's have the kumsitz. We'll talk. And my major point is going to be this. That wellness is something more than the absence of unwellness. we can say, for example, from a physical point of view, that I'm not sick. But that doesn't mean that I'm well. It means I'm not sick. Wellness is beyond not sick. It's something that is an active process in which we have to work very hard to go beyond simply being not sick or simply being okay. We need to work in order to develop a life that has some meaning and is considered to be a good one. If you can read that, his t-shirt says, "Just tell me what to do." Coming into the psychiatrist's office, just tell me what to do. Well, I'm not going to just tell you what to do. I'm going to try and talk about some things that might be helpful to remember, but we have to start here. Self-esteem. Can you see the slides? Yes. Should we cut the lights a little bit? Would that make it easier? I'll try and do that. I assume everything works in this university in the same way. If I touch this button, the light should go up. Self-esteem. Before we go too far, self-esteem has affected every single one of you. It has affected all of the ways that your parents have raised you. It has directed their decisions about you, and it is not what it's cracked up to be. It is not a food group. There's always, when I say this, a silence. What? Doesn't self-esteem make me more likely to succeed in life? No. Does it make me happier? No. And this is data-based. I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm a psychologist. Come from that empirical place over there. I am a data-based person. If I'm saying no, it's because Roy Baumeister, the guy who started the self-esteem movement, retracted all the stuff when he saw what happened to it. You can't just tell people, gee, you're good, and suddenly they become good. No, self-esteem doesn't work that way. Self-esteem does not have all of the wonderful effects that you think it has. And we spent a lot of energy trying to make everybody feel good all the time. And here's an example. We lost. But you get a big trophy. Why should I settle for good self-esteem when with the right medication I could have great self-esteem? Well, self-esteem is not what we expected it to be. I'm going to come back to that. Self-esteem, feeling good about yourself, is a good thing to do. It certainly is a valuable thing to do, but you can't get it by people telling you you're wonderful. You can't get it by people saying everything you do is great. You can only get it by doing something that is hard to do. By failing in things, by staying with something and ultimately conquering whatever it is that you have been unable to do, you develop a sense of self-esteem. You think those guys who climbed the mountain out there in Yosemite, they feel good? They tried and tried. You saw them? Those are guys who have self-esteem. But you have it too if you've done something that you're afraid to do or find that is hard to do. So let's look at the first concept that I want to bring to you today. And this is something I've studied for a long time. It's called Locus of Control. How many of you are familiar with it? Wow, it's working. Okay. Locus of control is generally a belief in the degree to which, or about the degree to which you control what happens to you in your life. The degree to which you are in control of what happens to you in your life. And very quickly, I'll tell you that locus of control is a dimension. It ranges from people who are internally controlled, that is, they believe that what happens to them is the result of what they do. And at the other extreme, external locus of control, we find people who believe that what happens to them is the result of luck or fate or chance or powerful others far beyond their own ability to make any difference. We know from more than 5,000 studies, not all the ones we did, 5,000 studies plus have shown that people with an internal locus of control do better in this world. That is, if we believe that we have control over what happens to us, then we are more likely to be motivated to try and do something about what's going on in our lives. To be externally controlled is to believe that I am a victim of forces beyond me. Now, if in fact you are in a situation where you are externally controlled, then being externally controlled is good judgment. For example, if you are in an airplane and you believe you're in control of what's happening to you, you're wrong. That is maladaptive internal behavior. However, if you have a math test tomorrow and you are externally controlled and you're sitting here hoping the test is easy or that the teacher will misgrade it or something, then you're being maladaptive by believing that something you can control is uncontrollable. So, there are some things that are externally controllable, some things not. Here we have something that every alcoholic among us knows. This is called the Serenity Prayer. And before every Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, people recite this. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the big one, the wisdom to know the difference. I need to be able to know, is this a situation that I can control and affect, or is it one I can't? If it is one that I can control and affect, and I choose not to try, I'm not being well. I'm not being maximally effective or capable. I'm being passive and helpless. I can buy a t-shirt, look at this. So we need to have a sense of internal control where it's appropriate and external control where it's appropriate. But the key here is knowing when something is internally controllable and knowing when it is externally controllable. And that's something we have to work on. So we need to be agentic in that. We need to take part in that effort. Now, let's look at classic definitions of wellness. Physical wellness. Well, I think we're really good at that. I think most people in your generation, the younger people's generation, are really good at this. And we see physical wellness being an easy thing. Wellness being, in other words, fit. Beyond simply not sick. I put these pictures up there because I said, I've never seen anything like this when I've been out running or doing exercise. This is what we see. It's much more realistic. Okay, so people go and we run and we do all kinds of things. We have our yellow band, strong out there. We're doing all kinds of things to be sure that in fact we are beyond just not sick. Now, the evolutionary psychologists tell us this is a good idea because, in fact, we are selecting parents and partners to be sure our children are safe and things like that. So somebody who's very muscular is seen as very attractive, or if you're physically fit, you look like you can have babies. So, that being aside, the fitness is not a problem. I think most people really are concerned about fitness, and we are doing with fitness what I propose we need to do with other areas of wellness. That is, we're really working on it. We have gyms, we have PE centers, we have all kinds of stuff. LA Fitness, oh my God. And we don't do too badly with this. Nutritional wellness. Taking good care of our bodies by thinking carefully about what we put into them. Okay? We look at these labels. Don't you look at these labels? We'll look at different things. Me, I have high blood pressure, so I look at the sodium level. I'm not concerned so much about the protein grams. Other people, my wife, she doesn't go beyond calories. That's where she stops. Salt, I don't care. She doesn't care. She breaks food in parts because she has a theory called broken food has no calories. Do you know that theory? Some of you use the same theory. If you break it, it has no calories. It's remarkable. Just as an aside, imagine if every book we had here at Emory, in the library, when you opened it, had something like this, that told us what intellectual nutrition was present in this book. 40% speculation. 60% data-based. Take it or leave it. Do you want to put it into your head? But that's something for later. This up. This is the champion food. This is the most high-calorie food available in any restaurant in the United States. It is the blooming onion at Outback Steakhouse. It has, as you can see, 1,949 calories in it. Daily recommended intake for an adult is 2,000. So you can eat a blooming onion and that's it. Most people wouldn't think of eating this because we try and maintain nutritional fitness. We're more like this. I can't have anything that's a food. Something from the supplement cart. Healthy. We want to be sure that what we put into our body, this is nutraceuticals, the idea that food is medicine. This is a relatively new idea, that you take certain kinds of foods for certain kinds of effects. Everybody doesn't like this, however. We have to keep it to ourselves. See what this says. I'll read you. It says, I've only been gluten-free for a week, but I'm already really annoying. And yet, here's this. Something's just not right. Our air is clean, our water is pure, we all get plenty of exercise, everything we eat is organic and free range, and yet nobody lives past 30. Do we have data? Do we have data that show us that, in fact, the way we're eating has long-term effect? Well, we have some, but we don't have as much as maybe you would think. Let me move on. Great, we've got the good stuff. Physical fitness, nutritional wellness. Let's look at relational wellness. Relational wellness. Now, I could go into a lot of reasons why, but I can tell you that longitudinal studies that have gone back as much as 100 years now, some of them, show us that longevity is associated with happiness in relationships with other people. There are several studies that have shown that the average increase in longevity for people who at your age, 22, 23, are in reasonably good relationships and know how to establish connections with other people, the average increase in longevity is between 7 and 10 years. This is controlling for smoking, drinking, whatever else you want to think of. It is the single most powerful variable that we've found in predicting longevity. We live longer if we're connected to other people. It turns out that this is something we can work on, that we can actually learn how to do this better. There's no question that having a connection to other people is health-giving. And there is no question there's such a thing as relational wellness. Take a pause here to look at this very amazing drawing. For those of you who've seen this before, some of you saw it this morning in a class, this is called the circumplex model of interpersonal behavior. Circumplex, meaning only that it's talking about behavior falling into a circle. This model was first proposed by, believe it or not, Timothy Leary. In 1957, Timothy Leary wrote a book in which he introduced this notion, saying that if you want to know about people, don't look at the individual people, look at other people in relation to those people. That is, if you're interested in person A, don't study person A, study person A in the presence of person B. How are we when we are with other people? Leary, sadly, as you probably know, left this area late in the 50s and began using LSD and other things. And as far as I know, in his later life, he didn't know he had written this. But nonetheless, it turns out to be a pretty good theory still. And essentially it says this. It says there are two basic dimensions of human behavior. I wonder if this has a pointer. No. Oh my God, what did I do? Two basic dimensions. Hostility versus friendliness. You see this one? And dominance versus submissiveness. In every human behavior, in every moment of human interaction, both of these dimensions are active. Everything we do has a component that stems from the hostile friendly dimension and a component that stems from the dominant submissive dimension. They are not independent of one another. They always occur together. Now quickly you can see that the quadrants that are formed by the intersection of these two dimensions have letters in them. FD, friendly plus dominant. FS, friendly plus submissive. HS, hostile plus submissive. HD, hostile plus dominant. And there are rules that are followed here. On this dimension, hostile versus friendly. The rule is the rule of similarities. Whatever A sends out, B sends back the same thing. If A is friendly, B will be friendly. If A is hostile, B will be hostile. On the other dimension, dominance versus submissiveness, the rule is of opposites. If A acts in a dominant way, B will act in a submissive way. If A acts in a submissive way, it will produce dominance in the other person. Okay? So if I go over here and I say, would you give me this cup, please?
Yeah.
Would you do it?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. So wasn't that nice? I was submissive and I was friendly. And do you see what this young lady did? She became friendly and dominant. In other words, the friendliness that I offered was returned with friendliness. And the submissiveness that I showed was returned with dominance. So, is she a friendly, dominant person? I don't know. Did I have friendly, dominant behavior? Yes. Wait a minute. I'm saying to myself, if I treat everybody in a friendly way, I'm going to have friendly people all around me. If I treat everybody in a hostile way, I'm going to be I'm living in a world filled with grumpy people. Is it luck that I find grumpy people, or that I find friendly people, or am I doing something to create the world I live in? What if you go out with 10 people and all of them wind up treating you exactly the same? Let's say they all treat you nasty. 10 people all treat you the same. Do you say to yourself, boy, I picked out 10 really terrible people? Or do you ask yourself the following question: in those 10 relationships, who was always there? It was me. Now the news here is really good, because at the same time we accept responsibility for interpersonal failure, we are empowered by the knowledge that we can control interpersonal success. If we say to ourselves, I am producing the reactions of other people when I interact with them, I then can change the way they behave. The world that I live in is controllable. What kind of person is Professor Nowicki? How many of you remember Professor Nowicki? Any of you? Some of the more senior people remember him. So he retired a few years ago. He taught abnormal psychology for a very long time. I was sitting in his office one day after he had given a midterm exam in abnormal psychology. And within a brief couple of minute period, 2 students came by. The first one came by and she knocked on his door. Professor Nowicki, I just took that exam. It was really unfair. There was a lot of unclear questions, and I want to talk about a lot of them. I think there should be at least more than one answer on many of those questions. And he looked at her and he said, I'll be happy to talk to you, but I can't today. Let's make an appointment for next week. And she said, okay, and they made an appointment and she left. Not 2 minutes later, Professor Nowicki, I'm sorry to bother you, but I had some questions about the exam we just took. I really studied hard, and I don't think I did as well as I wanted to, but I wonder if we could talk a little bit about some of it. And he said, sure, come in. Well, what kind of a person is Professor Nowicki? Can you imagine those two students walking out of the psychology building an hour later and meeting each other? Did you take the exam? Yeah. Did you go and talk to Professor Nowicki? Yeah. And the first one saying, he's a son of a bitch like all the faculty. And the second one says, I think he's nice like all the faculty. What kind of person is Professor Nowicki? He is who he's with. He is who he's with. And the people with you are who they're with as well. Interpersonal, relational wellness. You can control it. Unless you're Fritz Perls. This is something that went around a lot in the 60s and 70s. It's essentially a statement of responsibility to other people. Okay? I do my thing and you do yours. I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations. You're not in this world to live up to mine. You are you and I am I, and if by chance we find each other, then it is beautiful. If not, it can't be helped. This was a way of saying, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and if you don't like it, I'm sorry. It's probably not a good formula for relational wellness. Although sometimes people do get into this perspective and adopt it as the way they're going to live interpersonally. I think that you can't really do that anymore. The world is too complicated. But let's move on. Emotional wellness. There's been a big change in the way we're looking at things like anxiety and depression and sadness and feeling down and not being up and ready to face this world. It's that we have a different definition or understanding of emotional wellness. Emotional wellness meaning that you are basically more than okay emotionally. That is, you have a sense of what your emotional variability should be like. How many of you have had stomach aches? Good. When you had the stomach ache, did you assume it was going away? How many of you did? Well, okay, we all assumed it would. Did you go into psychotherapy for it? Probably not. If it was a really bad one, you might have called your physician. But here's what's changing. Emotional stomach aches. There is a movement afoot now which I really like, and it's essentially this. All of us, being human beings, sometimes feel crummy emotionally. All of us as human beings sometimes are anxious for no reason even. Some of us are depressed. We feel terrible, down. But in fact, that is the equivalent of a tummy ache. It comes and it goes. The normal state of affairs should not be anxiety-free. We have anxieties in our lives. The normal state of affairs is not depression-free. We're depressed sometimes. Even sometimes we can't understand it. It happens to us. Sometimes we don't feel like doing anything. Sometimes we get grumpy. Mikhail Epstein, who you don't know, he is on our faculty here. He is, goodness, I don't know, he's a philosopher, linguist, smartest guy I know. He says that our language doesn't have a certain set of words that we need. I'm going to give you this set of words. He says we don't have words for short-term emotional bursts that are negative. I'm sad. Now, I'm sad. Don't you get the feeling that I'm sad? That's going to last a while? I'm depressed. I'm angry. I'm happy. State of being seems to have duration. He says we need words for small moments of sad that we know are passing. He uses as his model the word particle, a small thing, a small part of something that is really not so important. Particle. So he says we should have sadicles. You know what a sadicle is? I was sad for a few minutes, now it's over. Are you kidding? But wait, any of you who's ever been in a relationship knows that the most important word is madical. I was mad for a minute. It's over. Really? We don't have to talk about it? Don't have to process it? We don't have to sit down? It's a madical? It was here and gone? I like that. It's just part of life. But so are hapicals. I was happy, felt good. Now I'm not feeling good. Now I'm neutral. Fine. So the emotional stomach aches, we begin dealing with what's called in psychotherapy now acceptance. We'll get to the Buddhist idea, but this is coming out of this notion of acceptance, you know? Things don't always work the way I want them to. Things always don't work out well. I have to accept that. If it's something I can't do anything about, if it's an externally controlled situation, I just have to let it be. Can we get past these emotional things? Here's a very interesting thing which I'll just tell you quickly about. It's new research. It's research in an area called embodied cognition. You remember Annie, who never fully dressed without a smile? Remember it? It's true. It's true. Embodied cognition, the research on embodied cognition is telling us that if you smile, you will feel happy. Not if you feel happy, you'll smile. It works both ways. If you adopt a posture that is a depressed down posture, you will feel crummy. If you're feeling crummy and you adopt some postures that are much stronger, you will feel better. It works both ways. Data are very strong on this. So emotional wellness, you're feeling really kind of down, you actually can get yourself up by beginning to act in up ways. You actually can do it. It gives you control over the level of wellness. Let's look at communal wellness. Communal wellness. Wellness as a part of a community. Now I started thinking about this wellness idea and the changes that have gone on I was driving to work and I come down past Sage Hill Shopping Center, coming to the campus, and you know there's a student house apartments that are there, and people wait for the Emory shuttle. And I'm driving by one day and I'm looking and I'm saying, goodness, look at how those people are lined up. I remembered this amazing article that had great impact by a guy named Robert Putnam. It was called Bowling Alone. It talked about what had happened to communal activities in the United States of America since the federal period, since the revolutionary times, when people would actually do all kinds of things together and communities work together, and there were town hall meetings and things like this. And he said, people are not bowling with other people, people are bowling alone. And he made some important points about this. Here is a group of children getting onto a school bus, and you can look at the school bus, probably going to be around 1940s. Here's children getting onto a bus today. You notice anything? Here's a group of people, stereotypic 50s people, waiting for a bus at a bus stop. Here's another group waiting for a bus at a bus stop. Here is a current group waiting for a bus at a bus stop. Do you notice anything?
Space.
The space? Here's another group waiting for a bus. Look at the distance. Look at the tremendous amount of distance among those people. Here's a group of kids waiting in a couple of lines for something. They were going to go to lunch or something. They got their lunch boxes. Here's a group waiting online at a train station. And what I noticed over there waiting for the bus for the Emory students, they're 3 and 4 feet apart. The community is expanding. There isn't this sense of, you can come close to me. Well, you can't. You can't. In fact, if you look over here, right over here, I mean, these people are on their tablets. They're on their iPhones. You've got to stay away from me because I'm talking to somebody else. I'm not with you even though you're near me. I don't know where this all started, but one of my speculations has started with the ATM machines. When people had to go to a bank machine and they had to wait, and people would stay back from them for fear that they would think they were going to try and steal from them. Amitai Etzioni, Italian sociologist, came up with something called the communitarian movement, which I think is a good thing, something to think about. Communitarian movement works to strengthen the ability of all aspects of the community, including the families and schools, in order to introduce more positive values. In addition, it aims to get people involved in positive ways in all levels of the community and ensure that society progresses in an orderly fashion. Great. Essentially, it means we are not doing things in groups enough. And when we are in groups, we're separate from one another. That's not healthy. We know that during all of recorded time, people have grouped together for safety, for security, for warmth physically even. We don't do that. It's something to keep in mind that maybe this has gone too far, literally and figuratively. Let's look at ethical and moral wellness. This means that we can't simply say to ourselves, oh, I'm an ethical person, I'm okay. Just like the muscles have to be exercised in order to remain strong, we have to exercise our ethical and moral capacity every day if we can. In other words, we have to say to ourselves, I'm going to try and make an ethical decision about something or a moral decision about something. And I can do that by acting in ways that are, in fact, ethical and moral, maybe even to my own detriment. This is too long to read up here. There's a tennis match with Rafael Nadal. Rafael Nadal is serving against this other player whose name is Smisek. And some fan yells out something when Rafael Nadal serves, and he is disrupted and distracted, and he hits the serve out. His opponent, who is now losing, goes up to the referee and says, I want him to have 2 serves. That wasn't fair. And people could not believe that he did that. He said, I know this is my detriment, but it's not fair that he was distracted by that fan. I want him to play an extra serve. And in fact, Nadal did, and Nadal beat him. He lost. But what happened was that people attended to what he had done because it was so unusual. Now, a couple things. One, it shouldn't be unusual for somebody to do something honorable. It should be something we try and do every single day. Find something that is honorable to do, even if it's a small thing. Find something every single day that is honorable to do. When I was doing this, I could not help but think of the Schwingfest in Switzerland. It's not something that you often think about. But years ago, this is a lesson that my children learned that I'm really happy they learned. This is wrestling matches in Switzerland. And there's this big pit filled with sawdust and sand. And these big giant men come out. And they wrestle with each other. And the whole point of it is for one of them to take the other and throw him down on his back. And the one who gets thrown down loses. And that's the whole game. But it's not the game, it's what happens after the game that was positively striking. Here's the guy being thrown down. Here's what happens afterwards. The winner reaches down and pulls the loser up. All well and good. But then, tradition, this always happens, as they walk away, the winner dusts the sawdust off the back of the loser. He dusts him off. You know, that's a nice lesson. That's a highly ethical moral thing to do. I've just beaten you, and I'm concerned that the mark of your having lost is there, and I'm going to do this. Help him up and dust him off. And all of them do it. It's tradition in the Shrinkfest. It's a nice thing. This is what it is. Anytime people ask me, what should I do to make a difference? I always tell them the same thing. You need to be supererogatory. Supererogation. What is supererogation? It means doing more than is required. Going beyond what is asked of you. Going beyond what is your duty. Going beyond the expectation. If you're going to help someone with 2 packages, take 4. If you're going to give 1 hour of your time, give 3. And when you do that, what you do is you say to other people, I am willing to go beyond what is expected of me. And the response to supererogation in our culture is absolutely positive to the highest degree. If you want to make an impact in this world, be supererogatory. Do more than is asked of you in all the things you do. If someone asks you for $1 on the street, give the person $3. If someone asks you to volunteer for a day, volunteer for 2. Say, no, I want to do it for 2. If you're at a place where somebody is obviously in great need and is selling things that he or she has made, pay twice as much for it. You will feel really good. The other person will be grateful, but you will be practicing ethical and moral wellness. Try it, you'll like it. Spiritual wellness. I believe every person must have a system of beliefs that he or she lives by. Now, I'm not saying that there's one that's special or more special than others. But what I am saying is that everybody has to have a system of belief that he or she lives by. A standard against which he or she can hold and compare behavior. I'm living up to something. I have a set of guidelines that I can follow. It can be Christianity, it can be Islam, it can be Judaism, it can be Buddhism. But there has to be something you believe. Even atheism is a belief system. It is a belief system. You must have it. Children must have it. Because otherwise they float through the world not knowing what's right or wrong. And you need to develop a belief system for yourself and not just kind of be washed through like a river is just flowing you down its path and you go wherever it goes. You have to say, well, I have a belief system. We have the Dalai Lama who comes here every couple of years. This is his last visit. I think it's one of the greatest things Emory does. One of the times I went to see the Dalai Lama, I remember he said, I'm a Jewish guy, you know, so if I say I'm going to be Buddhist, whoo, trouble. The Dalai Lama said, you don't need to be a Buddhist to accept Buddhist principles. You don't have to be a Buddhist to use the ideas we have about peacefulness. And you know, I thought about that, and I think he probably had something there, especially from the point of view of being a psychologist and saying, what is it that causes people trouble? So he says, what causes stress in life? Just as an example of a system of belief. What causes suffering happens all the time. Stomach ache, emotional stomach ache, part of life. But people suffer because they want more or they want something better than they have. They crave things. Craving things like a new car or I want the light to change. Each of those produces the same kind of suffering. So he says, well, what you need to do is accept what you have and stop craving. Okay? I don't have time to go into all of that. But that is a rule that can be followed. And psychotherapists who are doing now Buddhist psychotherapy, Buddhist-based psychotherapy, are teaching people these kinds of things. And I'll just skip over this, but this is, you can look this up. Buddhist approaches to overcoming stress. But any systematic belief system is something that's got to be there. Here's Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs affected every single one of us. See what he says. This is when he was younger. It's good advice. Here's Steve Jobs when he was older. Don't settle. Don't settle. Adaptational wellness, also known as resilience. Now, I became interested in resilience very quickly on September 11th, 2001, as most of our nation did, as most of the world did. Because before that, as a child psychologist working with families, talking to school systems, things like this, we actually believed that we were going to be able to raise children without trouble, raise them without problems in their lives, raise them without stress or trauma. Clearly, September 11th showed us that that wasn't possible. And so we needed to find ways of examining resilience, bounce back ability, if you will. The capacity to absorb problems and move forward no matter what. And so our children began being raised with this notion of resilience. But we overshot. We started worrying about how vulnerable we all are. That we are incapable of dealing with even the worst things that happen. And right after September 11th, as in many instances now of terrible things happening, people went and tried to talk to the victims of 9/11, to counsel them, to try and help them deal with the situation. This is what started it. My brother was right there. He's been here, he's come and talked to the people here at the Ethics Center about his experience. I have very personal connection with 9/11. And when he came back, after that was over, he said, I said, well, you know, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? He said, no. I said, I think, you know, I'm a psychologist, maybe we should talk about it. He said, no. Give me a bagel. He didn't want to talk about it. No. Was he odd? You may not be able to see this. This is from the work, the absolutely brilliant work of a psychologist by the name of George Bonanno, who studied people that were impacted by 9/11. He was very interested in whether or not there is some sort of resilience in the human spirit that allows us to overcome even the most amazingly horrible things. 3,000 people who were affected by 9/11. I'll tell you quickly what he found. 65% of them were unaffected by it. They got past it without any help whatsoever. Within just a month or two, they were fine. Of the other 30%, only about 10% had any long-term impact of what had happened to them. And those people had suffered incredible losses. But the vast majority of people were resilient. They bounced back. And Bonanno actually studied, and this is where some of you might not like what he found, but he said that the group that had the highest level of post-traumatic stress disorder were the people who did not want to talk about it, but were forced to talk about it with grief counselors and other people like that, who were there to help. What he said was, if somebody tells you, I don't want to talk about it, listen to them. They have ways of dealing with it. If somebody says, I do want to talk about it, you better talk about it. Because the people who wanted to talk and did talk also did better. But we have a resilience built into us that most of us right ourselves despite horrible things happening. What helps us to right ourselves? The research that I did with Robin Fivish over at Mariel at the Center for Myth and Ritual in American Life showed that if people knew family stories, what happened to their families, it made them more resilient. If children had knowledge of what went on in their story, in their history, the family history, they were stronger. And the reason ultimately became very clear. If you hear stories of people overcoming problems who were related to you, you begin to get a sense, wait a minute, I come from a strong group. We are all descendants of people who left somewhere, not always by choice, but for the most part because of the situations that were intolerable. We are a people that leaves or does things about stuff. This is from Viktor Frankl, a psychoanalyst who was in a concentration camp. And after that experience, he came out and he wrote about that experience. And this is what he said. The one thing you can't take away from me is the way I choose to respond to what you do to me. I can't control what you do to me, but I do have control over what my response is to what you do to me. That is my absolute final level of control. Family rituals. They keep us going. They keep us together. They give us resilience. They give us strength. All of us have family rituals. In Mariel, we discovered that the family rituals are pretty darn important. Because in a year that's very rocky, all kinds of terrible things happening, there are times when we all come together and do the exact same thing in the exact same way. Family dinners, cooking together, religious rituals, all the hokey stuff turns out is pretty important. Health giving, stabilizing. Invent rituals in your families. Create them. Find ways to connect with past generations. Here's some ways. You can wear a cowboy belt that belonged to your father. See this? This is my father's belt. Not his belt anymore, but it's his buckle. I wear it every day. It's a connection. It's a pocket watch. You probably have one that belonged to your grandfather or great-grandfather somewhere in your house. Take it out and use it. Can you imagine looking at these hands? If you had a ring that was in this photo and you wore it every day, can you imagine the power of that in your life? If you had a ring that belonged to your grandmother and you had a photo showing her with that ring? There's lots of ways to make connections. The connections are all waiting for you in your house. Your grandma's house. Your parents' house. Intellectual wellness, the last one I want to talk about. There is this guy, this playwright, who says that this young generation are pancake people. Some of you have heard me tell you about this. Pancake people. What does pancake people mean? It means that you're spread very, very thin. But you're pretty wide. You have access to more knowledge than any other generation instantaneously. You can just look up anything you want. And it's there. But it's sort of like having a giant external hard drive. All the information is carried outside of you. There's no question that you can have access to it immediately. But in terms of what we know about creativity and coming up with ideas that have never been thought of before and making connections that have never been made before, the same information has to be inside the same place at the same time. And the internet will not give you that kind of thought. It'll make combinations, but it won't come up with saying something like, my rye bread sandwich has mold on it. Maybe there's something in there that the crumbs killed the bacteria. Maybe I've invented an antibiotic, which saved more lives than you can imagine. Might not have been in a pancake, but it would have been in a muffin. The muffin. This is my goal for all of you. Is that you remain with the muffin top. I think it's fine. It's broad, it's all-encompassing, but underneath the muffin top there must be depth. Somewhere there has to be depth. You have to fill your mind with as many bits of information as possible, not knowing their purpose, not knowing their usefulness, ultimate usefulness. You simply have to learn as much as you can so that you have this muffin, and your muffin is unlike anybody else's. Because the muffin top is just like everybody else's. If they've got Google and put in the same two search terms, but there it is. Everybody's the same. But if the muffin is called into play, they all vary. So what you need to be is a well-nourished, sociable, resilient, internally controlled, friendly, physically fit, ethical, moral, and spiritually anchored muffin. And you'll be proud on that day you graduate when you sit there among all your fellow muffins. And realize that you've spent your 4 years at Emory baking yourself into muffindom. And at that point, I think you'll be on your way to wellness. So I thank you.